It's a philosophy that's been around for about 2,000 years, a sound mind in a sound body. But interestingly, can exercise make you smarter? That's the question we're asking today on The Mental Space. Well, my guest today recently teamed up to carry out a massive piece of research with Asics called Mind Games. My guest, of course, today is Dr. Brendon Stubbs, a leading expert who's been looking at the field of mental health for more than 2 decades. And he's going to answer that very question for us today. Can exercise make us smarter? Dr. Brendon, if I may, welcome to The Mental Space.
Thank you so much. I'm so pleased to be here.
So you're here in the region, you're here in Dubai today, and we're here at the headquarters of Asics here to talk basically about Mind Games, which is a massive documentary based on a huge piece of research you did to answer that very question around exercise and the link to cognitive ability. I'm going to let you do my job for me a bit. Why don't you give us a bit of background to the experiment, to the documentary, to the relationship with Asics, and then let's dive into some of those findings.
Sure, absolutely. So, I think we all know that exercise, physical activity and movement is good for our bodies. So it's good for our physical health. We know that. But what we don't know anywhere near as much about is how it can actually help us, make us feel better, and how it can improve our performance and also our function. And we were really interested in the latter. If we train the body, can we improve the mind and people's performance? And it was a really exciting experiment, which was very unique and novel, which we did with Asics, which, as you say, is Mind Games, the experiment. And really what we wanted to do is to look at some super high performers who weren't engaging in any regular exercise. Okay, so these are people who were engaging in sort of elite level sort of games, such as mahjong, or like chess, or esports games. So they were functioning at a really high level, were super thinkers and strategic people, but they weren't engaging in exercise. And we know outside of this that if you do exercise, it can improve your sort of cognitive function. But what do I mean by that? So how clearly you think, your concentration, your memory. But we wanted to see in the untrained people who were already at a very high level, can we boost them even further? And we followed their journey, 77 people over 21 countries, over a period of 4 months. And that was all about Mind Games and what we did. Would you like me to say what we found? Before we do, just give us a little bit of background. Like, I know the documentary follows a story about 4 specific people. They had a kind of range of different backgrounds, didn't they? So just tell us a little bit more about the people that the Mind Games, the documentary focuses on, and their story. Sure, yeah. So the global study had 77 people, and you're right, the documentary, to really illustrate the point, followed 4 individual people's journeys. And they were all from sort of really different backgrounds, both in terms of geographical region and also in terms of the type of mind games that we're playing previously. So we had Yoai, who was from Japan, and he'd previously, done some exercise a bit in the past, but hadn't done for a period of time, and his game was mahjong. And he really wanted to get back into mahjong and completing. Well, this is this sort of long strategic game, which is very common for people in Japan. So we followed him on his particular journey, and at the same time, in my home country, we also had Ben. And Ben is a wonderful example of the power of exercise for all people. And Ben had never exercised by his own admission. He'd never owned a pair of trainers. And he came on this journey by his own admission, reluctantly at first. And he had some amazing abilities, such as being able to remember, I think, like 16 52 card packs in reverse, and being able to remember all of the cards. So he was, a memory champion. And it was just phenomenal seeing how super smart he was. And he joined us on this journey. We saw some amazing things happen with Ben, and also how interested he became in this journey, and some great results for him too. And then we had Sherry, and Sherry was someone who had exercised in the past, but hadn't for quite some time, and she really liked online games, so particularly Tekken, which is an online sort of a combat game. And she competed at like big events such as Evo for anyone in that particular space, and she really got into this and benefited from that. And then we had Casa, and Casa was a really pioneering young Afro-Caribbean chess player who was going to be the first Afro-Caribbean grandmaster chess player.
and wanted to follow his journey as he really wanted to break through the mold to become the first Grandmaster chess champion, and we followed his journey too in the documentary. So all really different characters, all really inspiring in their own right, and all exceptional people.
Before we get into the results, I'm going to tease the audience just a little bit more. What was the inspiration for this? You know, yourself and Asics, you're obviously a doctor with King's College London. You've been looking at this field for 2 decades. Asics, sound mind, sound body. But where did the inspiration or the idea for this, global study come from, and how did you develop it?
Yeah, so I think it's really a marrying of 2 different types of worlds. So, Asics is a really sort of technical brand that really appreciates sort of data and rigorous science in addition to the sound mind, sound body philosophy. And that's also been my own research for the last sort of 20 years as well. So it's a real great marrying of our own interests and expertise. And I think the interest comes from a number of different areas. But if we look at what happens for most people, so most of us are not engaging in what is recommended for national or international guidelines for how much physical activity we should be doing. Mm-hmm. So globally, it's recommended we do 150 minutes to 300 minutes of moderate or vigorous intensity physical activity over the course of a week. So most of us are not doing that. So we wanted to look at what happens if you look at some people who are perhaps more, extreme and not doing any exercise but they're already functioning very high from their cognitive function. Can you, make these super, thinkers even higher? And it was really the idea of, looking at this group of people, how this could be applied to all of us. And if they can improve their cognitive function, imagine what can happen just to a regular person like me, or anybody else who considers themselves in that category.
I'm not sure a doctor with 20 years of expertise can class themselves as a regular thinker. However, okay, so we've got this group of people, high thinkers. Tell us what you did with them before we get into the results. I'm going to keep the audience waiting. But what did you do with them?
So essentially with a coach and lots of other people, we developed this 4-month exercise program, which we met people where they were. So before people enrolled, we gathered their baseline levels of fitness. So we looked at how strong they were, how good their cardiovascular fitness was. Then each person was matched up with a trainer in their local area. That's really key, because many of us, if we're starting exercise or restarting, it's helpful for us to have someone who can guide us and show us what is useful and what's not, and motivate us along our journey. So that was really key. And once people had established their baseline, they began on their training program, which was due to be incrementally increased as their fitness improved. And people started on like a cardio fitness program, mm-hmm. So getting the heart and lungs working, starting with, like for instance, Ben, which was quite light walking. Yeah. For him, he wasn't able to run up until sort of later on, and also some strength work, because we know more broadly that the 2 sort of key areas that we want to work on when we're doing our fitness is a heart and lung fitness, and also having our muscles nice and strong. So we had a strong focus on aerobic fitness, and also a strong focus on strength. And they were trained 2 to 3 times a week, building up to the recommended guidelines of 150 minutes per week.
It's fascinating you talk about Ben's story as well, because as you say, the guy couldn't run before you even started that. And sometimes, and what I love about this documentary, and one of the things I want to kind of return to in this conversation, is the fact that perhaps it doesn't matter where you start, it's where you can get to. And Ben started from perhaps very far behind. So anybody watching this documentary, there's something for everyone to take out of this. There's a message from everyone to take out of this. What would you say is that message to anyone that wants to dial into the Mind Games experiment, the Mind Games documentary? If they're looking at themselves and going, you know what, I could feel better. What did you take away from that, from a human level rather than the data level? Yeah,
so I think it's really important we talk about the human level. Because very much exercise, and if we're going to engage in this in the long term, what's going to appeal to us is very much how does it make us feel? Mm. Because if you tell me, for instance, that if I exercise or do physical activity, go for a walk, and then in 20 years' time I've got a 10% reduced risk of a heart attack, it's like, is that going to motivate me for the long term? In a few weeks and months? Probably not, and the data shows not for most people. But if I tap into that, I can just start with small amounts, no matter what my level of fitness is. And if I do that, I experience some internal benefits to me. I think better, I'm slightly happier. then that is enough for me to sort of say, okay, well, I'll have a go again tomorrow or next time. And then that sort of positive feelings that we experience and the joy of, of taking part and of also sort of, engaging can help us, compound in the right direction. So I think it's very much on a human level about how we become interested in sport and exercise and how also we keep motivated, and that can help us have the long-term benefits. So really, the key messages are no matter what your fitness level is, unless you're a super competitor and you're doing loads and loads and loads, which is a small proportion of people, just doing small amounts can make you feel much better, think clearer, feel happier. And I just think the benefits are just really there and profound for all of us.
Okay, so tell us some of the data then. Tell us some of the findings you took away from this experiment.
So I think some of the key headline findings are that we looked at the mind game people's international rankings, and we found that they increased by 75% from the start to the end after 4 months, because everybody was competing at least at a national level. Yeah. So it's phenomenal that this objective marker improved for all of these people, which is phenomenal. And we also we did these cognitive tests with people. And what do I mean by that? Is we tested their thinking, their reasoning, their reactions, their memory in 3 different objective tests. And on average, across each of these, their cognitive performance improved by 10%. And there were slight fluctuations going from sort of 9 to 12% across each of the individual metrics. So people were able to, process new information quicker. Their short-term memory improved. Their reasoning improved. So this is, another person coming in and testing them under test performance and seeing how their brain is actually working. So that's really exciting. And we also saw that people's state of mind improved. So how they felt within themselves improved over this period of time, as did their actual physical activity levels. So, overall, this is really a great, depiction of, engaging in physical activity and exercise, meeting you where you are and gradually increasing this over time, has a plethora of benefits on people's physical and also mental health and cognitive health.
Give me a bit more, if you can, around the mental health side of it then. Like the impact that you saw from this study around mental health. I think I saw some figures from previous stuff where you looked at levels of anxiety and people's confidence issues, which is massive in today's somewhat social media curated. We're always being compared to other people, and we're seeing endless images of people who look amazing on Instagram. But when you carried out this research with these individuals, what level in terms of mental health did they take away from it? If we talk about sound body, we accept they're doing exercise, so that's going to be good for their body. How did it impact on a sound mind?
Yeah, so we measured people's confidence before and after, and we saw like a 33% improvement in people's confidence. We also measured people's anxiety, particularly when they were playing their mind game. Mm-hmm. And we saw, over 50% reductions in people's anxiety levels when they were playing their mind game. And also in terms of people's feeling and how positive they felt about themselves. We saw again over 50% improvement within that. So we saw, a range of performance and mental health benefits for this particular group of people. So not only were they exercising more, were they going further, were they going faster, were they sort of thinking more clearly, they were also feeling much better.
We sometimes split, and what I do like about Asics philosophy of sound mind, sound body, is we sometimes split these two, or it feels like the two areas have been split for too long. It's just physical health. It's just physical health. And then we have mental health on the side. Has this experiment and confirmed something you've long held and long believed around the fact that it's kind of one system, they're all connected? Yeah.
I mean, it really is. And, we have to, consider the whole body and mind as one. Because you can't, just consider one in isolation. If you're going to improve your physical health, through exercise, then you're naturally going to have changes within your brain and your mind too. So really, this is an encapsulation of everything that message embodies. That if you engage the body through movement, then you're going to see benefits for the mind and the body. And when you've got those two working together, then you've got a much better operating system as a whole. Because if one of those is out in kilter, then it quickly affects the other one.
We talked about 50% decrease in anxiety, which I think seems huge. However, these individuals were part of, an incredible experiment. They had a personal trainer, they had a set regime, and you got them up to the 300. Sorry, what was it again?
150.
150 minutes. So, in a real world example, for the rest of us, how much exercise does it take to make a difference?
Yeah, so there's evidence, and we have done with Asics and outside of this, showing that if you do exercise over time, just starting with small amounts, then you can improve your mental health over time in a meaningful way. And you're right, within this project is people had personal trainers and they had more intensive input. And one of the projects which we've been doing with Asics is called the Movement for Mind program.
Okay.
This is this free resource which again meets anybody where they are. So if you're already running, or if you're just starting, or if you're just walking, is you can start on week 1. It's an 8-week program. It's guided. You can download it on iTunes and all the other stores, and it's free to use, and it's like a guided progress. You've got your own virtual coach to help you increase your levels of physical activity. It's incorporating mindfulness and access to green space and several other techniques. And what we've done is, show that you can improve people's well-being by a meaningful amount within the workplace. So we did this actual experiment within several multinationals in the UK and also across Europe, and showed meaningful improvements in well-being and in mental health too. And this is a much sort of lighter touch to people who can't, perhaps for a number of different reasons, have a personal trainer, have access to other facilities. This was very much self-guided, and that's really exciting too for people who don't have those resources. And outside of that, do we need to wait 8 weeks? Well, no. So some other work which we've done with our Asics is looking at what is the minimum amount of threshold that I need to do to experience an uplift in my mental health. And we did this study with over 1,000 people from all over the world, and we wanted to answer that particular question.
Yeah.
And we developed this tool called the Mind Uplifter, where we could ask people to rate how they were before and after they engage in exercise, and we did some facial recognition. So we could look at how people's facial expressions change before and after exercise.
Yeah.
And across all this data, we showed that 15 minutes and 9 seconds was the minimum threshold through which people could go and have a single bout of exercise and have a meaningful improvement in their mental health. 15
minutes and 9 seconds. That's a remarkably short amount of time. I mean, we live here in, the UAE, which is it's an amazing place to live. There's so much opportunity. At the same time, we have got studies that say we're one of the hardest working countries in the world. I think one study put us at the 3rd hardest working country in the world. I'm not sure Bhutan and Malta are actually working harder, but anyway. And when we look at levels of burnout as well, we saw in one study, 98% of respondents said they were suffering from at least one symptom of burnout. What's the impact, or what's the benefit for us in terms of coping with the demands of the modern world? Because we say the UAE is busy, but let's face it, everywhere in the world right now is busy, and probably busier than it's ever been. Basically kind of coping with the demands of modern life, because as I say, we are working so hard these days.
Sure, yeah. So, exercise and movement, it can be really beneficial for people, whether it be reducing the risk of burnout, helping us to de-stress, and helping us cope with society at a large. And it's important to recognise when we engage in exercise, there's a whole spectrum within which we can work. So we can do relatively light touch exercise, which is very soothing for the nervous system, and very soothing on our sort of breathing and also our brain as well. And that's quite nice for all of us. So if you're on a work break, for instance, if you're able to get one of those, and you can go out for like a short walk. But there's also more intense exercise where you can you can really sort of shock your body and brain into sort of more intense sort of restart, and that can really release a number of different chemicals and sort of restart your brain and body throughout that. But really the mind and the body are a very sophisticated machine that works in orchestra, and there's only so much stress and pressure we can put our orchestra under. And exercise and movement is really a fundamental piece of self-care, which helps keeps our mind and body well oiled to help keep us sort of calm, relaxed, and functioning well. Because if we're all of the time under pressure and we're not making time for ourselves, and we're just constantly on the go, and we have no release for that, and we have no oiling in the in our bodies and our minds, then inevitably people will start to break and experience those things you mentioned, burnout, not able to sleep, etc.
Yeah. I'll come back to the sleep thing. I think that's absolutely fascinating. So if we put this in the workplace setting as well, that figure of 15 minutes and 9 seconds, there's so much anxiety and we spend so much time in the workplace, a third of our lives. If people are struggling, what level of activity do they need to do? As you're saying, if it's literally they're having a really stressful day or they've got a massive meeting that they need to prepare for, does a 15 minute and 9 seconds walk help?
Absolutely. So, if you don't make time to create a break for you and for your mind and body, is eventually your mind or your body will make you take a break. And more often than that, it's a pretty big crash for most of us that experience that. So by taking these small breaks throughout, is you're providing yourself protection and performing better at work. So it's really going to benefit you. So just 15 minutes during the course of a day, whether it be in the morning, lunchtime, just separates you from everything that you're doing at work. And you'll be able to go back and think more clearly, be able to function better, and just completely shift everything that's going on within you.
Do you mind me asking a little bit of your backstory? Like, what attracted you or what inspired you to get into this space? I mean, you've been working in this space now for 20 years, which, looking at you right now, is a good advert for sound mind, sound body. But what brought you into this field of study in the first place?
So I'd love to be able to say it was a really noble interest and I was passionate about this area from the start, but really it's a number of different sequences that led me to this. I started working in a mental health hospital soon after graduating, and the reality is as I went in to go and work in a mental health hospital and I saw people suffering on a whole new level, and all of my friends and family were like, why are you going in a mental health hospital? Are you going to be okay? Are you going to be safe? Such was the stigma.
Yes.
But I went in there and I saw humans who were suffering and I could make a difference. And I saw people respond, who were just so grateful for my time. It was very focused on important things such as medication and other things as well. But early on, I started taking people for walks, started giving young men and also women access to gyms. And I saw the transformative power of sport and exercise for some of the people who were struggling so much there in hospital. And that really kick-started my journey to see the power of sport and exercise. And I built from there.
One of the things that mentl stands for and our entire mission is around tackling that stigma of mental health. In your 20 years, and again, I love the fact you've teamed up with Asics, which is a very, it talks to a wide community of people. We sometimes have this fallacy, in my case, that, it's a private thing that doesn't affect many people. Your research over the past 2 decades, is this something that impacts us all, and therefore none of us should feel alone because everyone struggles at some point?
Absolutely. Look, we all have physical health. I've got a body, you've got a body, and we all have mental health. We all have feelings, and we all have a range of mental health emotions and metrics which change. And just like my physical health can be under pressure at times, whether it be milder things such as a sore knee, sore back, or perhaps an actual injury, there's going to be times when I'm under pressure and stress, or anybody else is, and they're being stretched. And the thing with mental health is, if I go over on my knee and I sprain a ligament or I snap a ligament, we do a scan and you can sort of see that, and there's a course of action you take. But with mental health, there's not really, you don't go in and take a blood test, or you go in and blow something. So it's quite difficult for us to measure and to understand it, but we all have it. And for many of us, it can sort of tip over from being, struggling to also becoming an actual condition where we need treatment. And often that sort of that gap is not very clear. And it's important that we talk about it, because if we don't, there's a lot of shame in that, which is brought upon by society, and also secrecy that, I don't know, whatever those internal or societal beliefs are, I should be able to deal with this. Why is everyone else coping? I'm not. And that just leads to more isolation, and more sort of deterioration in our mental health. So it's really important that we speak openly about this, and it's really important that we have role models who talk about their journey, and really important that we talk about solutions in this space, such as prevention and management, such as the useful power of sport and exercise too.
You talked there about isolation as well. I mean, we saw recently the US Surgeon General now saying that isolation and loneliness is as bad for us as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Do you feel that exercise is a gateway to tackling that sense of isolation, because we can access communities through exercise?
Absolutely. And I think exercise is such a powerful way to create social support around you. And we know that social support and connection is really important for our physical and mental health. And if we get the benefits of movement within that, the benefits on our physical and mental health can be compounded in the right direction. So I think exercise and physical activity as part of a group or a community can be so powerful for all of us. And we should all be trying to tap into some sort of sense of greater belonging or purpose with the group.
You've been on this journey for a couple of decades. As part of this, the mind games experiment really focused, as we talked about earlier, on human beings. What surprised you the most, or what inspired you the most? Because you've done many of these studies, you've seen lots of research. Were the things that stood out for you that you went, oh, or were the things that really moved you here?
People's journeys. So it's always about people for me. I didn't go into this field for numbers. So it's always individual journeys of seeing people change and people be touched by my own personal experience of engaging in sport and exercise, and other people have had it. So if I go back to the documentary, for instance, all of the characters had really profound and important changes in their journey. And if I think about Ben as one particularly obvious example, he hadn't owned trainers since he was at school for many decades. He was really reluctant to engage in sport and exercise, didn't think it would do anything for him, very skeptical. And then he started to engage in it, and you could slowly, over this 4-month period, start him to sort of, change, become interested, then wanted to sort of look at his times and then look at different routes. And he just built up and changed completely. And that's just one example of many people. So it's the individual stories of people's lives being transformed by the power of sport and exercise. Not that they're becoming, amazing athletes, getting six packs, but they're seeing people's lives changed.
And for the audience, just remind us, like, Ben, how old is Ben when he came to this experiment?
From memory, he's about 50.
Yeah.
Maybe late 40s.
So and that was an aspect, because I've been fortunate to watch the documentary. Age, because we sometimes think, oh yeah, you're in your 20s, and as you say, the 6-pack and that sort of thing. Age isn't a barrier, or perhaps it's even more of a reason for people to lean into exercise. What was your experience from that, and what's your research told us about the fact that actually age isn't a barrier?
Yeah, age doesn't need to be a barrier, and we've done research more broadly looking at what we call quote unquote healthy aging. So if I want to sort of not only live longer, but I want to function better, so I can do the things that I want to do in my life, so I can get around pain-free and be independent, is we found that physical activity and exercise is really powerful to improve our trajectories so that we're independent for longer. So engaging in physical activity and exercise today can not only make us feel better today, but also further down the line is you're providing protection and a buffer so that your muscles are stronger, your bones are stronger, and also your brain's stronger going forwards, and better connections. So you're looking after your brain in the future too.
So we see we're bombarded constantly with messages around exercise, nutrition, all that sort of thing. I'm going to take it from you, because I know you've been, a doctor, King's College, scientist, 2 decades. What are your top tips? Give our audience your top 3 or top 5 things that they really should do, or perhaps even 1 or 2 things they should ignore that we're being constantly bombarded on.
So exercise can be an off-putting word, and I find that some people find that, depending on your experiences in the past, if you've perhaps, for instance, not enjoyed PE at school, if that was part of your curriculum, then you may...
I'm from the 70s in the UK. I'm not sure anybody enjoyed PE back then.
There you go. So, some people that's enough, and some people are like, it's just not for me. You just mention the word exercise, I'm like, not me. Yeah. But really, we're changing the conversation. This is about physical activity and exercise. So really, my first message is find a movement that increases your energy expenditure. So that could be for you dancing, it could be playing badminton, it could be skating, it could be walking, it could be running, it could be squash, you name it. Find something that you like, and then go and do it. Because if you find a movement, you enjoy, you're much more likely to do it tomorrow, next week, and in the future. So that is absolutely key for us. And I think modern society, is really encouraging, particularly if you go on social media in some circles, is you've got to go really hard, really fast, all of the time. And that is good for some people for some of the time, but only a small proportion. Can you do this in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? Probably not. So the important thing is having a healthy, enjoyable relationship. And that is my first, particular tip for exercise. The second thing is that, just get started. Do not be put off by, you need to do a certain pace, you need to do a certain time. And I often find this within my own life. Sometimes I just think, I really can't go for a long run today. I want to go for a run, but I can't go for half an hour. I can't manage it today. I don't feel up to it. So I'll put off. And what I'll do is I sometimes don't feel like running fast. So what I'll do and say to myself is I'm just going to go out for 15 minutes and I'm just going to jog really, really light. And then I get out and I start to move. I take the pressure off myself and then I can start to enjoy it. So just knowing that just doing small amounts, and just doing something and being in that habit is better than sort of crashing and saying, I'm going to do 60 minutes today and then I'm knackered and I'm not going to do anything. So just keeping that habit builds a momentum.
Okay.
So small amounts can make a meaningful difference. And if you can, do something that you enjoy within a group or where you see other people, because not only is that good for our mental health and our physical health, as an activity in its own right, but when combined with movement, it adds to that element of enjoying, adds to that element of belonging. It just really compounds the benefits of our physical and mental health. And that really applies to areas such as the workspace too.
Give us one thing we should ignore then. What's one piece of advice that we perhaps should ignore? Or one thing we should ignore that we're telling ourselves?
Ignore the hype around exercise, should be done just for how you look in the mirror. You're selling the benefits of exercise extremely short if you're just doing it for how you look. This can be a downstream benefit, but you would not believe the science beyond what is happening to your bodies and your brains by a bout of exercise today or over a number of weeks. If you could just see what's happening in your brains and in your bodies, you would be utterly amazed. Do not judge the benefits by how you look in the mirror.
We saw a piece of research actually that I think Asics led as well, which was about kind of like, and it's something I've struggled with in the past as well, about comparison. When we see these before and after and we're constantly bombarded with these pictures, as you mentioned the six pack earlier. Is that something that we need to cut ourselves a bit of slack? Because it's impossible for all of us to look like these individuals. And often those individual pictures may have well been doctored or they're a curated experience. So comparison and how we all compare ourselves these days because of social media.
Yeah, it's a natural element, as we naturally compare ourselves with other people. It's almost innate within us. It's, you see young children, they're sometimes quite happy with what they've got, and then if you see someone else playing with something else, they want to sort of go over and play with something else. So it's natural for us to do that, and to a certain extent it can be helpful, but to another extent, at the other end of the spectrum, it can be really detrimental. Is like almost to the point with exercise. I'm never going to look like that guy or that girl on Instagram. So I'm not welcome at this particular place. I'm not going to get started. So it's not helpful. And also it can just have a negative voice within us and make us feel like we don't belong. But those pictures that you see of people who look impeccable, they can be altered, but they can just be that person's reality. And that's not the average body. And it's important that we only compare ourselves with ourselves. And really, it's just superficial look at ourselves, and the benefits that come from exercise are much, much deeper. So comparison is overwhelmingly not helpful unless it's within ourselves and how we're doing.
I could carry on this conversation literally all day. I find it fascinating. Your experience with the mind games experiment, and when we look at the world today, more anxiety, perhaps more stress than we've perhaps ever had to deal with in the past. What gives you hope, particularly from this most recent experience with the mind games experiment with Asics?
There's lots to be hopeful for. I think that we're seeing, so in the context of mental health, is we're seeing more people talking about it, being open about it, so people are not being as stigmatized So it's fantastic that this is an open conversation like we're having today and people are relating at home. That gives me tremendous hope. It also gives me enormous hope that we're having, major brands such as Asics, who have always stood for this, but have continued to invest in science and actionable steps for this, that it's deemed important enough to do so. And also is that the science is providing really credible, tangible evidence that exercise is really good for your mind. And I just think this is just such a powerful message, because if we carry on, dangling the carrot that if you exercise, you will get a six-pack or you will look a certain way, we're going to lose people, and they're not going to experience the mental and cognitive benefits, which we saw in mind games.
Yeah.
And which we can all experience. So that is just really important, that we're talking about how it makes us feel, how it can sharpen our minds, how it can improve our concentration. And that's something we can all experience today.
Employers out there, I mean, it's only a question that leaps to mind now, but they should be talking about this, shouldn't they? And if we're talking about cognitive ability, then, obviously the corporate sector is all about, performance and having people that can operate at their best. Surely this is a conversation that should be happening at an employer level as well as a personal level.
Absolutely. So, your employees are your asset, in terms of your workforce. So if you want the best functioning, the happiest, the most sense of belonging, the sense of community we've talked about today, the highest performing, then, giving people time and supporting people to engage in physical activity and exercise, including as a collective, can really sharpen people's mind, performance, reduce burnout, and also reduce sickness days and other things where people may take time off.
Okay. So you're here for the regional launch of Mind Games, the documentary. Where can people tune in and watch this documentary?
So Mind Games is available on Amazon Prime in over 30 countries, and it's also available on YouTube, where people can also visit and watch it now.
I've seen it, and I genuinely recommend you watch it. And particularly, my standout, I love them all. Ben is hilarious, but his journey is so inspiring. So go out, watch this documentary. And if you've enjoyed this conversation as much as I have, please remember that you can subscribe to The Mental Space. If you're watching us on YouTube, click subscribe. We're on all the podcast platforms. Check out Mind Games. And Dr. Brendon Stubbs, thank you for joining The Mental Space.
Thank you for having me.
Very welcome.